just to give you a little bit of background of how I've come towards this work, by training I'm an architect, and I was working for a variety of different architecture firms in Chicago, but very interested in community development, very interested in the lives of people, and in the places that I would drive going from home to work. I worked in downtown Chicago, right outside of what some of you may know used to be called Cabrini Green, which was one of the largest public housing sites in Chicago, and now has been redeveloped. But I lived on in the western suburbs, near west suburbs, Oak Park, which for those of you who are architect buffs, is Frank Lloyd Wright and all of that. So that's kind of where my passion for architecture began. But all these neighborhoods, driving through them would make me think about what people were living in and how they were living and how it was affecting their life. And I realized that I'm very passionate about housing and about what we call home. And housing isn't a right in this country. It still is very much a luxury. And I wanted to have a hand in affecting people's homes. I mean, if each of you can take just 30 seconds, think about your favorite childhood home. Like, what made it home for you? You know, was it, the actual space? Was it that you had your own bedroom? Was it that you didn't have to share a bedroom with your sibling, or it was a fun place to be, or your special hiding place? And really what it is it doesn't matter if it was an igloo, a tent, a shack, a garage. It didn't really matter, public housing, it didn't matter what it was. It was your sense of home. And who you are really developed through what you called home. And so that for me became very important. And in the mid-90s, I actually went from being an architect to working with a nonprofit, a faith-based nonprofit on the west side, Bethel New Life, which is very well known nationally, doing some real estate development for them. And then I came to Claretian Associates. And so just to give you a little bit of background about Claretian Associates, I've been there since 2004, so about 8.5 years. And I was doing this math when we were talking earlier because I was a little intimidated. The other presenters, they are talking about thousands of units and all these people, 200 people that work for you. And I'm like, oh, when I started working at Claretian Associates, there were 5 of us, including the janitor. Oh, okay. And now there are 13 of us, and probably 8 of those are maintenance staff, so we're not a very large organization. We focus on one neighborhood in Chicago, which is called South Chicago. There's smaller subsets, about 5 subsets in that one neighborhood, but we service about 3,500 families a year. And we were started by the Claretian missionaries. For those of you, I do a disclaimer, I'm not Catholic, so if I mess up, just blame it on my head, not my heart, okay? So, but they're of a order of Roman Catholic priests who've been dedicated to our community, this community, since the 1920s. And our history is really steel mill country. It is where a lot of the steel was made to build downtown Chicago. And at its height, over 100,000 people worked at US Steel, which is like 5 blocks from my office door. And so as that industry started to demise in the 1970s, and then finally closed in the 90s, families started to just flee South Chicago. And so South Chicago had what a lot of people would expect from a neighborhood that's kind of on a decline. A lot of gangs, a lot of crime. The housing was very questionable because it was made for worker housing. It wasn't really made for families. It was made for men who were coming to work in the mills. And so a normal house could be bisected into like 20 rooms because you only slept there, and then you went to work and you worked 1 or 2 shifts, and you shared that room with someone else who worked 1 or 2 shifts. So it might be 20 people living to what was maybe a 3-bedroom home. So it wasn't quality housing. And so I'll change the slide now. So this slide kind of tells you how we kind of evolved, because again, the Claretian missionaries had been there since the 1920s, and the steel mills started to decline. They were very concerned about the housing. They were very concerned that the families that were left behind didn't have quality housing, didn't have affordable housing, and so they decided to build housing. And so this slide kind of shows our beginning, starting with the priest taking over a parish called Our Lady of Guadalupe. And for those of you who are Catholic, you'll be able to appreciate this, but it's also the National Shrine of St. Jude, and even those of you who aren't Catholic, because I'm not Catholic and I appreciate this. So St. Jude, I learned, is, in my time there, St. Jude is the patron saint of lost causes. So when you've gone to every other saint, St. Jude is your man, right? So that really resonates a lot with our community. That, you know, this is like a lost cause that we're bringing back to life. And the priests were definitely committed to doing all that they could do. So not only did they start a housing arm, but they also started the local medical clinic, which now services thousands of people a year. They also started a school. They also started our local mental health facility, which is Metropolitan Family Services, which is now very well known around Chicago. They started a lot of different endeavors, not because priests know how to do it, but because they realized the families in the neighborhood needed it. So this is kind of a slide that kind of tells and it's kind of hard to see, so just catch it later on the website. But it kind of shows our metamorphosis. And this slide right here, just to let you know too, so we focus on one neighborhood. We service all of 60617 with services, but with housing, we only really have done about 120 units of housing. So that's why earlier I said, oh, when people are talking about thousands of units of housing, we've done 130, and we're working on 7 units now, but it's in a 5x7 block area. So 120 units of housing in 5x7 blocks is immense. There really was nothing there before we started doing the work that we're doing. And for us, it's amazing just to see how it's evolved over time, but it's also important to see what can happen when you really just target one place and you don't kind of scatter everything out. But it's definitely been an evolution. We didn't come to green by way of being so strategic and saying we're going to be the greenest, you know, developers, affordable housing developers in Chicago. We came to green because it just made sense. It made sense in what we were doing. And so as I walk through kind of the presentation, I'm really walking you through our evolution as an organization and what we came to learn and how we were able to implement green in everything that we do. So this slide kind of gives you an idea of our work and how we do what we do. These are, so this square right here is this is our targeted area. And if you can see all these different greens, these represent our projects. So you can see how they're speckled throughout the neighborhood, And then finally, if I can mention right here, this eye right here that you see, for those of you who might know a little bit about Chicago, and I mentioned before the U.S. Steel site, which used to have hundreds of thousands of people working there, it's been closed since the mid-90s, and it is 600 acres of land. For those of you who might have grown up in a city like me and really didn't know what an acre was, if you've ever been to downtown Chicago, the Loop fits inside of that about 3 times, 2.5 to 3 times. So it's immense. It's also the last developable lakefront property in Chicago. So what happens there is going to definitely affect what happens in our neighborhood and is going to make the difference between our neighborhood being strengthened or our neighborhood turning into a larger eyesore, put it that way. So I mentioned that also to say that redevelopment efforts on that parcel of property also helped us to kind of get on the map with green, with the building we were already doing. We were able to work with our local Department of Planning and Development to put in an application and become the first LEED ND neighborhood in all of Chicago. So now everything that is built, everything of substance, maybe substance isn't the right word, but of a certain size, has to have a certain standard. So as they're building up that property, it's a great opportunity for green buildings to be built, but also everything that gets built now, infill, also has to have a certain standard. Okay. So one of the main things that I want to talk about is how we approach development. We looked at development as not an opportunity to come in. Because the priests are devoted to this neighborhood, they were an entity that's going to be here forever, as long as they possibly could. So it wasn't coming in telling other people what they need to do. It was working with the community to define what they wanted to see happen. Our community is very immigrant. From our beginning days as a steel mill industry, a lot of different immigrants came to our neighborhood. And although we are oftentimes seen as a Mexican neighborhood, we're really only about 45% Latino, because even in that Latino, it's largely Mexican, but also other Latin cultures are represented. And then we also have a large quantity of islanders, West Indians, so Jamaica and Haiti. We have a large population of Haitians. And then we also have a large population, believe it or not, of Croatians and Serbians. and they have come to this country through South Chicago. So we have a huge immigrant mix, and a lot of work has to be done around, there's not a lot of, I would say, conflict necessarily, but it's just making sure that the cultures play nicely, work together, and benefit from each other. So a lot of our effort has been on making sure that we have multicultural representation while we're doing the planning. Also, a big thing that comes in is affordability. Affordability, safety, and security. Because in the 90s, we had the tag of being the murder capital in Chicago. Now, Chicago's an immense city. So do you really want to be known as the neighborhood that's the murder capital? I don't think so. So we've really done a lot of work around safety and just working with our community on how to prevent, not only how to work with the local gangs and prevent some of our at-risk youth from joining the gangs, but giving them other options. So we have a lot of programming around that. But then it also needs to be options for families of various sizes. We have very large families. So a 2-bedroom really isn't going to work. We have to look more at 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms, because that's the sizes of our families. Also, options for various cultures, because depending on what culture you come from, it really does determine what you see as important. You know, whether it's whether it's building size, whether it's amenity size, there's just a variety of different things that, depending on what culture you're coming from, that needs to be taken in consideration when you're developing. And then developing from an asset-based mindset. Because we had so many homes that were worker housing, and they weren't quality, and they had to be demolished or they fell down and had to be taken away. We had tons of vacant land. So we had to look at what would be a benefit, basically, from having all of this vacant land. We were doing infill housing, so we weren't tearing anything down. We were just basically coming in and infilling what was there, and that is an asset. A lot of times we look at a community and we look at all the things that are bad about it, but really every community has great assets, and we have to learn how to build on that. So we know we needed collaborations. We know we needed to work with communities that were like ours, who had similar challenges or similar assets. We also know we needed to work with other neighborhood organizations that had experienced what we had experienced, other government agencies that had our same mindset and had our same mission at hand, and then, of course, the residents, homeowners, and renters. This is our first project, the first major project we did. We actually have done a series of homes. First, we did a series of 9 homes, actually. Was our very first project in the 70s. And who wants to guess how long it took us to sell those 9 homes? Anybody want to give a guess? 1 week. 9 years. Took us 9 years to sell those first 9 homes, because although we thought, oh, this is great, the families need homes, they had no money. No one had a job. So how are they going to pay for a home? Actually, we still own one of those homes, and we rent it out to another local nonprofit, and it allows us to still give back to the community. But it took us 9 years to sell those first 9 homes. So then we just kind of worked on community programming, and then we decided that we would work on senior housing, and we started doing a series of resident meetings around senior housing, what they wanted to see. A lot of them had raised their families in the community, and they really didn't have quality housing. So we decided to build what was called the Villa Guadalupe. We started that in 1990. Well, we actually opened the doors in 1991. We were able to kind of self-finance or guarantee a bond, the priests were. So that allowed us also not having to use, it's not a Section 202 or anything like that. And that is not a slight against that. I mention that because I mentioned before, we're dealing with a lot of immigrants. They don't have the necessary documentation to be able to qualify for that type of housing. So it was important for us to be able to house them, and so we had to come up with a financing mechanism that would allow us to do that. So that's what I meant by just mentioning that it wasn't a typical Section 202. But it did target families that were 50% and below AMI, and it also helped them to maintain stable housing, as well as there were over like 10, I only mentioned 10 countries here, but there are actually well over 10 countries that were represented in this building. It's 53 units. And then we worked with seniors that were over 55. So our youngest senior is 55. Our oldest senior is about mid-90s. So we have a range in the form of seniors. We have seniors that are still working, and we have seniors that have long since turned the work world away. But either way, they're very lively seniors. And so we began to work around different programs for them to keep them basically just active parts of the community. And as this building is over 20 years old now, so now we're thinking of what do we do next with the building? And actually it was thoughts around this building that began some of our ideas around green, because we realized that if we really wanted to keep this building up and running, we were going to have to look at it as basically like a body. Like, what can we do to shore up the body? So we had to start thinking about weatherization, replacing some of the systems with better energy efficient systems. Last year, we actually had a solar thermal installation put on the building, which is really exciting because now the seniors are like, our hot water comes from the sun, and that's great to hear in any language you hear it in, but it's great that they understand that, we're upgrading the building for them, and we're actually embarking this summer on doing a $500,000 renovation project of our community rooms and our common spaces. And a lot of that is, some of that is energy efficiency work. Some of it is just updating things, but as we're going along, we're making sure that everything that we do has a green island, a lens to it. Does that make sense? It has a green lens to it. I mentioned before the 9 homes that we built. Totally, we've built almost 40 single-family homes or 2-flat, but those first 9 were considered phase 1. And so I've shown here some examples of phase 1 and phase 2. We kind of, as we've evolved, we've understand what meant a lot to our families. We started out with these very small 2-bedroom brick buildings, and we realized that our families were outgrowing them immensely. So then we started building 2 to 3 floors, and they would be skinny, kind of fit on a standard city lot, which is in Chicago, that's 25 by 125 feet. So the buildings had to be 19 feet wide, so it's a really skinny building. And then over time, we realized that our families needed more space, and they needed a variety of other different things. But this particular slide just talks about the families that we were serving. Again, it's for sale this time, so we couldn't really target 50% and below AMI. We had to target 80 to 100%, 120% AMI. And just so you guys know what that means in our area, because I was having a conversation at lunch, and it means different things to you depending on where you live. For us, 50% AMI means a family of 4 that makes less than $37,000 a year. So those are the types of families that we focus on in our rental housing. This slide just talks about our rehabilitation of existing buildings, because we found out early on that it's great to do brand new buildings, rental buildings. It's exciting, but when we really want to make something affordable, it's better to start with a structure that's already up. Even though a lot of our buildings were compromised in nature, when we could find a building, a multifamily building that we could renovate, we jumped on it. And so we had the opportunity to take some really great buildings and renovate them into rental housing, as well as our own corporate office, which is on the left. We turned that 3-flat into our corporate offices. And so we worked with the local veterans. If you see, there's a really nice mural on that building. We worked with the local artists and the local veterans to make sure that everything we do has a complete and a comprehensive building, a complete and comprehensive community input into it. But then the building on the right is an 8-unit building. It was vacant and it had been taken over by gangs. We basically were able to buy it from the city, who got it foreclosed on it from someone else. We got it for like $1. And then we were able to work with a local contractor to renovate it. And 60% of his staff were community people that he just got off the street and taught a trade. So for us, that was wonderful. That was actually absolutely wonderful. And we just actually last year did a huge weatherization project, and we had air sealing and windows weatherized and all these different things. So we've been able to go back and do green retrofitting. This is an example of our phases 3 and phase 4 for sale housing. And this is when we really decided that we were gonna go with the gusto. This project had over 20 different green things. It was our first opportunity to put solar panels on for sale affordable housing. Our first family, between all the layering that we were able to do, bought this home, which at the time I think it was selling for $145,000. They bought it for $85,000. So it was 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 1,400 square feet, not including their basement. And so they still live in it now, and we've been able to build about 12 other homes. And the solar panels just were, a great opportunity. We talked to them about, the recycled carpeting and all these other things. And these were structural insulated panels, so they are really, really tight houses. I actually live in one, and my highest, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but my highest heating bill in Chicago weather was like $120, and it's 3 floors. And it's like, since I live in a 2-flat, it's 2,200 square feet. So that's amazing to me. We also work on open space projects, though. We've learned that we can't just build the housing, but we also have to work with the families around things that make sense to them. And one thing was open space. There weren't any safe places for the kids to play. So we actually worked with the community over 3 years to put together a park. And we worked with our Gallery 37, which was a city art program that worked with youth. And we were able to put murals in the park and do all kinds of great things with this public park. This is another multifamily project that we were able to do. It was new construction, so we put it up at about, in 2005 it came online. We only had the marketing period open 6 weeks because it was only 29 units, and in the first 6 weeks we had 1,600 applications for it. So we had to close down applications. So now with us being under construction on a 7-unit building, we're a little bit afraid of what's going to happen when we open up the application process. But this was also a green building and had great open space on it, and we were able to do some bioswales and things like that. And then this building, we did a community partnership. It was our first LEED building. It's actually a 2-phase building. It's 112 units of assisted living, which for us meant that our seniors, when they moved on to the next level of care, had somewhere to go before they went to the nursing home. And then we also have an independent portion that's about 72 units. And we run kind of like it's called a senior center, but it's kind of like a senior Y. For those over 55, you don't have to deal with the young kids trying to take the machine away from you or anything like that. And then this just talks about our quality of life planning through the New Communities program, which is with LISC. We've been able to do everything else that we can do around housing. And so that's education program, that's bringing new schools. We have 2 charter schools. I have to talk very fast because I have 1 minute. New charter schools, as well as do education programming. With that whole big project that's going over on USX, we really feel like we can get our community to be educated to be green building people that can be hired to not only build new buildings, but also deconstruct the buildings that have to be torn down. So we're really working on a green workforce program right now. And we also are able to hire youth, work with the local arts center, work with the local artists, and infiltrate all of this into everything that we do. So for us, it's not just building, it's the whole gamut. How can we infiltrate everything that we do into every other program that we do? So how are we getting here? Basically, it takes putting together a great team that has a consistency of mission and message. We have to learn to speak each other's language. And I mentioned to someone earlier, when I'm talking to a single mom about why she needs to be interested in green, I'm explaining to her about saving her energy bills and how she has more money to go somewhere else. Or when I'm telling her how she needs to have a garden, it's because that's something that her kids and her can do together, that it's fun. It will lower her grocery bill, and she'll have more money to do other things. It's speaking that language that means something to someone else. And we've evolved from our Consider the Mustard Seed mission statement to It's About Community to Building Community, and now from Steel Town to Greentown. So really helping our community to understand that it's all about green. Questions?